Beloved, believe it or not, we are 11 Sundays this coming weekend from the initial Pentecost season in June. And the summer has gone by really quickly. And yet we have endeavored to focus in on the work of the Spirit in our lives. And we've been looking at faith. And one of the readings for this coming weekend is from Luke 13, verses 10 to 17. And I want to read it to you about the woman that was bound with the crippling spirit that was bowed low. But there are a number of things here that are worth looking at. And the text tells us now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. So now this is within the context of the rhythms of the Sabbath and the Sabbath day. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. Now we're told that there is a woman that appears. Where she comes from within the crowd, we don't know, but somehow she makes herself visible from and distinguished from the crowd. So she's moving in a direction towards Jesus. Something in her is moving. Now she's bowed low, so her face and her back are facing the ground, the dust, the dirt from which we came. And all of that is really important because as human beings, we are bipeds. We were created to stand tall and erect and not crawl on all fours. But she is in a crippling position and has been for 18 years. And it says a spirit has crippled her. So that somehow, while we don't fully understand the mysteries of the unseen world, and while oftentimes we oversimplify them, clearly this involvement with the world of the invisible includes entities that have the ability and the power to affect physical dynamics in our bodies. And she has been bound and crippled by a spirit for 18 years. Now that also, I'm sure, has affected her emotions, affected her mood, affected her psyche in all sorts of ways. It says that she was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. In other words, the intent for which she was created, to be able to stand upright and see face to face with others, has put her in what Leanne Payne years ago in The Broken Image called the lonely bent position. We are created to see eye to eye with one another. God created us for communion. It is not good for us to be alone. It takes two to know one. So to be in what Leanne Payne called the lonely bent position is to be excluded from the possibility of the communion of the saints, and to be excluded in the community from the possibility of enjoying real koinonia, fellowship, participation in the life of the community and ultimately in the life of God. She was quite bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over. So thank God for the eyes of Jesus. You know, the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, seeking whom he may strongly support. When Jesus saw her, there are just things that Jesus sees that move him. When he sees suffering, when he sees affliction, when he sees destitution, when he sees marginalization, when he sees dehumanization, these are the things that move the heart of Jesus. These are the things that move the heart of the Father, because to see Jesus is to see the Father. These are the things that God is concerned about, and the things as followers of Jesus that we can't afford to ignore, and we need his heart so that we can be extensions and bear witness to him of his life to those that are suffering. Jesus couldn't stand to see her in that condition. I am not sure if we've not become a little bit too desensitized to the sufferings of others in the current consumer-driven culture and in the political climate that has created an us and them mentality. If we fail to be able to see people in their suffering and in their humiliation and not be moved with compassion, it's our blindness that we're going to be judged for. Jesus saw her and he called her over. He literally invites her in her lonely bent position to at least hear. Now, in a bent position, that means she would have had to have tilted her head in the direction of where her ear was hearing his voice, because faith comes by hearing and or listening by the word of Jesus, the word of Christ. And she hears him and she begins to move in his direction because he called her over. He's inviting her closer into communion with himself. And he says to her, woman. Now, this is the name given to the helpmeet of Adam. And that word helpmeet doesn't mean somebody that's just a subordinate. It's the same word for helper. The Lord is my helper. This is a co-ruler with men in the kingdom of God. This is one who is equal to a man. Woman, you are set free from your ailment. And so my dear friend T.D. Jakes years ago classically took this as a Sunday school class, Woman, Thou Art Loosed, and turned it into something that became a movement to help liberate women from emotional distress, from psychological distress, and from relational distress, and has had a major impact on many, many, many lives. Woman, you are set free from your ailment. So now, whatever this spirit is, this entity is that's created this, it has now also had a physical, chemical, biological reaction. So the ailment itself has to also be dealt with. He says, woman, you are set free from your ailment. But then he goes on further and he lays his hands on her. So that it's not enough for him to simply say to her, woman, you are set free. He then has to make contact so that his very uncreated life, his energia of grace, his divine uncreated light and virtue, that is the life that heals, has to pass through her system. He imparts to her. He doesn't merely speak. He backs up what he says by an impartation. He laid his hands on her. He makes an intimate connection so that when he moves his hand towards her, that which has its hand on her that is opposing God, that which is against what God has intended for her purpose as a woman in life, his hand moves against it and imparts what will cause her to rise above it. And it says immediately she stood up straight. And the first thing she begins to do is adore and worship God. So that her first response is the response that all of us are to be created and intended to do, which is to worship him. And so she immediately moves into worship. And the leader of the synagogue becomes indignant because Jesus cured on the Sabbath. It's amazing how petty religious people can get. It's amazing how ignorant they can be of what really matters and how they can strain at a gnat to swallow a camel. And he says there are 6 days in which ought to be done. Come on those days to be cured, as if he had the power to cure the woman. Anyway, she's been in this condition 18 years. He's done nothing to help her. There are a lot of people that can complain about what's not right and what should or shouldn't be. They rarely, if ever, are used by God as agents of transformation. Love is transformative. Grace is transformative. The triune God of grace is a God who will reveal himself as a God who cannot stand to see us sufferings and will light suffering and will himself suffer with us to bring us to healing and wholeness. The Lord answered him. This is Luke letting us know that this is Yahweh, God in the flesh. This is the one who has the authority to do what he did because he made the Sabbath for human beings and not human beings for the Sabbath. He says, you hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away and give it water? So they're caring about the beasts that are domesticated, but a woman who is a daughter of Abraham, part of the elect, part of those that have been set apart to be blessed and be a blessing, whom Satan bound for 18 years. What was that synagogue ruler doing for the entire 18 years that precious woman in a bent position came week after week to worship God but could not see face to face those that she worshipped with and could not lift her face to heaven until the glory and the lifter of her head, the Lord Jesus himself, lifted her up to release her from the satanic bondage that had kept her from her ability to become everything she could be. And Jesus publicly shamed the voices that were powerless to do anything to bring about transformation and only could put blame and shame on others. There are certain things that we need to understand in a culture where we're so concerned about shame and blame. There is a godly shame that we never want to lose that is tied to the failure of those who want to put everyone else under their control and subordinate them to their rules and regulations. They do need to be shamed publicly, and it takes wisdom to know how to shame them. But I want you to hear me, and I want you to hear me in terms of the heart of Jesus. Jesus is still scanning the nations and scanning the synagogues, the churches, the gatherings, for those who have been in a lonely, bent position and are in need of being lifted up so that they can be restored to communion. And some of us don't realize how we've been bound by the spirit of darkness and by the spirit of legalism and by the spirit of unhealthy, maladaptive shame. Jesus comes to deliver us from what Leanne Payne called the lonely, bent position so that we could see eye to eye in Zion. I pray God would touch your heart with his compassion and grace, cause you to know that he sees you where you are, and he wants you to stand tall and see eye to eye. Moses looked face to face at the Son of God on the height of the mountain. He communed with Christ face to face, and the glory so changed his face that he had put a veil over it because there were people that didn't want to live in the future now. But you and I, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of God, are being changed into that same image from glory to glory. How do we see his face? We see his face as we look in one another's eyes and learn to worship God together. Sunday's going to be a powerful day as we continue this journey of faith and we look at Isaac and the digging of the wells and the sowing in a land where there was famine. I promise you're going to be blessed. Bring somebody with you. We're going to have a great time as God brings about his purpose further for us as a household. See you then.